Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I continue our conversation about Miami University cutting programs amid financial challenges. We also return to the question, is it better to apply early action if your grades had a slight dip from fall of the junior year to spring of the junior year? And our question from a listener, Lisa will join me. We'll have a Speakpipe question from Julie from California. And she has some questions for us about school profiles. And back by popular demand, as promised, Lee Coffin from Dartmouth is back. You may remember I said we did a 7-parter. I decided to break it up. 4 parts on tough questions about college admissions. And now he's back for the 3-parter on understanding Dartmouth College. And there'll be no college spotlight for the next 3 Thursdays because our interview is a spotlight. Friends, hopefully you heard last week where Vince and I discussed Miami University cutting 18 programs amid financial challenges. We'll continue that conversation now. We'll also continue our conversation about whether a student that has a slight dip from the fall of the junior year to the spring of the junior year should apply early action, or should they wait and try to bring their grades up in fall of 12th before they apply to the colleges they're interested in. So I also would argue that we haven't made the case for how valuable they are. And we have just caught up in STEM. And as an institution, as a school, I think if you put more effort, and there's things you can do. You can bring speakers in that can talk about listening. You can bring employers in that can talk about some of these key skill sets that you get in those courses are what we look for.
Right.
I mean, if you hear Mark Cuban, he goes on and on and on and on about how valuable the humanities are, and he thinks there's going to be, the pendulum's going to swing all the way back. And as a guy who hires thousands of people, he's always looking for that skill set. So I do think that, your budget is also a reflection of your values. So there's a mix there between, if kids aren't taking it, they're not taking it. And it is a problem. I mean, I remember talking with Dean Fitzsimmons at Harvard when I was there for a week in 2019, getting some more admissions training. I will never forget him saying that, Mark, there was a time when being a male in the humanities was a hook. Now being a female in the humanities is a hook. That's how much things have moved away. Also, Rick Shaw at Stanford, he was one of the key leaders there at the time. He did a workshop on how they use student search. That's when you buy lists of names to the College Board as part of the recruiting. He said our entire list buy is all in like the humanities and social sciences. We already have kids banging the door down to come to Stanford for engineering and comp sci and biology and chemistry and pre-med. But our entire list buy is targeted toward kids that show interest in humanities and social science. So that was 2019, so 4 years ago.
Right.
So, and those are at, you don't get more elite than Harvard and Stanford. So if it's happening there, it's trickling down other places. So I get the business reality of they're not showing up. How can I justify paying you?
Right.
I mean, I remember conversations along those lines going way back, Every school looks at that, and certain things, you don't see nowhere near as many German departments as you once did because you don't sign up for it that often.
Yeah.
So, but I do wonder, I don't see the effort being made that I think should be made to educate people on the value of these. And of course, and I'm not saying you have to make the case you need to become a major, but make the case for you supplementing your college major by taking courses. As long as you take enough courses, then the demand can be there for the faculty. Now, one thing I would disagree with you a little bit on, and I get your point about like Miami of Ohio's, and this comparable in some ways to like a USC and University of Miami and SMU. But when a school is undergoing a decline in enrollment versus a school that's having a surge, I think the financial health of a school is really important in where a school is at. And I know you do too. I think you were just emphasizing understand like the caliber of some of the professors and the caliber of some of the program. I think we really actually don't disagree. We're probably just talking about a school from a different perspective.
Yeah.
I get concerned when I see schools laying off faculty, declining enrollment. I get concerned. It doesn't mean it's not a good school, but that is not a positive for me when I'm assessing a school. If I'm, if like let's just say it's my own kid. I was very conscious because I did the college counseling for both my kids to look at schools that were very sound financially, health-wise. To me, that's a pretty big factor in an assessment. But once again, I still refer Miami of Ohio because they're really good, but it's just, it is a negative right now for them, as well as West Virginia, Ohio Wesleyan, and many, many, many others. If they're being compared to a school that's comparable but flush with money. You can just do a lot with money that you can't do without it, and it could be everything from how strong your career center is. That's one of the reasons why University of Richmond is just a complete gem. People don't realize that their endowment per student is higher than like places like Vanderbilt and Duke and many of the Ivies.
Wow.
And I see the kids that have gone there and the incredible experience they've had because of the resources. The resources are incredible at that place. But anyway, I'm going off on a hobby horse here, a little tangent I have on resources in schools. The other thing the article points out, though, we'd be remiss to neglect it. Let me read it. And first of all, we should probably tell people what the 18 majors are. So, which majors are facing consolidation? American Studies, Art History, Classic Studies, Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, French Education, German Education, Health Communication, Health Information Technology, Italian Studies, Latin American Studies, Latin Education, Religion, Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies, Spanish Education, Social Justice Studies, and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Now, the article does talk about the fact that the political climate, that doesn't use this language, but it's basically the anti-woke movement. And it does talk about what role has that played in some of the stuff getting dropped. And I guess nobody really knows, but we are seeing that all across the country. The social justice, race, ethnic piece. It'd be naive to not think that plays a role when you look at all across, especially in conservative states, how those courses are getting dropped, even by places that do have money. But I think it would also be naive to say it's only that, because look at how many of those things on the list were foreign language. There's like 5 foreign languages that were on there. But in reading the list, though, what I was thinking, Vince, it's sort of reinforcing my thought about how I think a case needs to be made more for these things, because Spanish, look at the demographics of this country. You got to know Spanish you're going to be at a real disadvantage to not know Spanish in 20 years from now if you're a young person. People are going to be employing, they're going to be hiring, and be like, oh, you're bilingual? Well, Spanish population is large. You're not. I'm not trying to say you're dead on arrival, but it's going to be real plus to be at least halfway fluent in Spanish.
Yes, I agree.
So I could argue cutting that, really? Given the way the demographics are trending? So anyway, those are just my thoughts. Any thoughts?
I think this is something that we should keep our eye on, because I think it's like you said, it's both things. Are we consolidating? Are we cutting because we have a budget crisis and we weren't managing our resources well? Or we really have to think about two things. Why are the humanities important? How do we promote that? And how do we make it, how do we encourage students to consider those areas when they solve many of life's, they at least address the questions that come up for many students are found in those majors? Why don't we want the answers to those questions? And why does it seem to be a greater decline than the number of students going to college? It seems like interest in these particular areas is less for lots of reasons. And that's one thing that I think that students should, and parents, and as educators, we all need to think about.
No, well said. You know what? Before I let you go today, I want to ask you an even harder question.
Okay.
I want to go back, because I think this will be of interest to our listeners. So I want to go back and revisit the same question I said to you. I said a student had 3 A's and 2 B's, and they went to 3 B's and 2 A's. So now we're going to say they had 3 A's and 2 B's normally. That's like kind of their typical grade profile. If you look at their 10th grade, first semester, 11th, let's even say 9th. Now they go from 3 B's and 2 A's to 1 A and 4 B's.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2 of the 5 academic courses, they have a grade drop. Not DF.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could have threw a C in there, whatever. I'm just trying to make a point. Would you give the same advice, exact same advice as before, or does that change it if they dropped in 2 of the 5 course?
I don't think it changes the advice. You still have to look at school contacts. Yeah. I think you still have to put your foot in the door and hope that your grades show a sharp increase in performance, and that something rises to the top to keep you in the mix, so that they can say, well, this person was organized enough to say that they're interested early. Look at this great trend. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say yes. So even with more B's than A's, I still think early action is a better solution. Generally.
You know, and I've thought through this, my answer would almost be the same as yours. I would say you still always have to look at school context. First of all, let's just establish that. And then the second thing I was thinking of, if I felt like, from what I knew from that school and our own institutional data, or our own data that we track, if I felt like that kid was not going to get denied, then I would say the same thing as well. If you can get to the deferral status, of course, I don't know for sure, but if just based on research, what I've seen, kids like this at this school more likely to be deferred, I would give the same thought. I think one thing that I think we've talked about it enough, Vince, but probably not, to be honest, on this podcast. I think we've talked a lot about how important yield is. For new listeners, yield is percentage of admits that enroll.
Right.
You admit 100 kids, to 20 come, to 80 come. Yield drives the bus. You got to get heads in beds. And you have to know how many people to admit to get to that number. And it's complicated because it's not just one number. You're going to have a different yield rate for someone who's in your backyard versus coming all the way across the country. You're going to have a different yield rate for certain majors. You're going to have a different yield rate for a 4.0 kid versus a 3.3 kid, because the 4.0 kid's going to have lots more options. So the thing I don't know if we've talked about enough is how much research schools are putting into the data to study yield.
Yes.
Talked a little bit about it when we did we talked to Matt Bonser from Colorado College, and we talked about, not only demonstrated interest, but predicting yield. Did a segment on predicting yield there. And I came back and shared some thoughts after my trip to the Pacific Northwest. I did a whole segment on all the quants and the outside agencies that schools are hiring and paying big bucks to in order to help them calculate yield. But we live in a data-driven age, and more stuff is getting unearthed through data.
Yeah.
And if a school, let's just throw some numbers out just to make a point. Let's say a school knows that they have a 33% yield rate with early action, and they have a 16% yield rate in regular. You better believe that's going to influence a lot of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Vince and I were talking earlier before we came on the air that a school, and I won't mention it here, even that they did share it in a somewhat public forum at one of our national conferences, but I still don't know if I feel comfortable saying their name. But a school was telling me that there is a profile of an applicant that they have less than a 1% yield with. And Vince and I were agreeing, we don't blame them for saying, we're not going to admit you.
Right.
Even that you're stupendous, because our data shows you're probably not coming. There's a person who says that is so unfair. You're practicing yield protection, you naughty bad person. But the business realities are, okay, I know that I'm being held accountable by multiple people, board of trustees, could be provost, could be president, could be, at a minimum, it could be faculty, could be, certainly it's parents and students and other people. Hey, why'd your admit rate go down? What's wrong with you? Why should I suffer my admit rate go down to take a kid that has a 1 in 100 chance of coming? That doesn't make any sense to me. I think that in admissions, it has to be a balance between what's right for the applicant and also what's right for the school. Somehow there has to be a balance there. Naturally, parents and students, they only think through a prism of an applicant and a parent because they haven't done that job, and it's understandable. That's why I really appreciate the work of Brennan and Rick Clark, because you've got a yin and a yang there with Rick coming from the institutional position.
Yeah.
And Brennan, he did a year at Franklin and Marshall in admissions, but he's been on the counseling side for 25 years. So he thinks more like a school counselor and is an advocate for students.
Yeah.
And Rick's an advocate for students, but he is looking at the business realities of, that's why, we had Brennan on in 2018, Rick 2019, we had him back again in 2020, and now they're on last week's episode in 2023 in our interview segment. I always bring those guys back every couple of years because they have a lot to say. And then they're also willing to mix it up, which I like as well. And then they keep it very, very authentic. If they disagree, they're both very genuine. And I think that's a learning opportunity for people to hear that, But schools have a lot of data on yield. Like, I was telling this to a family and they really got upset, but I couldn't blame the school. One of the schools, and I'll just leave it at this, on one of my West Coast trips, I took the trip to Cali for 9 days and I took the trip to the Pacific Northwest for another 7.
Yeah.
One of those schools on that trip told me that one key metric they track was their engagement with the student in the 9th grade.
Wow.
And it's not that they hold it against kids who didn't engage in the 9th grade. It's that they're finding that kid that's been engaged with them since 9th has a really high yield. Now, I hesitate to say this because it makes people think, I guess I need to start the process in 9th grade. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to feel that frenzy. But I am trying to bring up the point that when an institution has yield data, it's really hard to ask them to ignore that given how important yield is. I think the public in general, they really have a mindset of, especially at selective admissions, they have a mindset a little bit of like, sometimes it feels almost impossible. It feels like you're almost doomed. Like, what do these schools want? Perfection? Like, it's so competitive out there. And there's obviously a lot of truth to that in certain schools. But I think what they don't see is schools feel the same way.
Yes.
I was listening to this guy do a presentation. He was at a Vermont school, and he was talking about a conversation he was having with a high school senior. And he asked the senior, how many schools are you applying to? And the senior said 42. And the guy was doing the presentation, and he went, what am I supposed to do with that? 40, I got a 1 in 42 shot. How am I supposed to survive out here with the 1 in 42 shot? Now I realize we know that's on the higher end.
Right.
But the point is, like, I don't think sometimes the public knows how much schools feel like there's only one of you, there's thousands of us, and they're all vying for the kid. And that's why I know it's really controversial that University of Denver is giving, came out publicly and said that they are giving special financial considerations to people that apply ED.
Yeah.
I don't want people applying ED that don't know the school. I don't want people making premature decisions. But I've seen what University of Denver's yield is, and it's not good. It's a really, really good school. It's a really, really good school with a low yield.
Yeah.
I know that Susan's going to think I trained you really poorly, Mark. She's listening to this. I can because this goes against all the NACAC principles. You couldn't even do this before, right? It was a violation to give an incentive for ED.
Ooh.
But I understand why a school would do that, given the competitive climate. If it's that or close, it's not like some of these schools aren't trying a lot of things. It's not like, and I probably, offended a lot of people with that because I know it's a controversial position, but I just understand, like, it is really, really, really competitive out here right now, down 2.5 million kids, and desperate times call for some desperate measures. And once again, I don't want anybody Dean who hasn't visited the school or doesn't know what they're getting into.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually understand why this movement we're starting to see to incentivize people to ED. I see why it's taking off, and I don't necessarily see it as unethical. As long as you're giving full, thorough college counseling and you're not having kids make premature decisions. What do you think about that, Vince? Because, that goes against all the policies and the practices that we were raised about what you could do with ED in the past.
Yeah, I would say, going back to your original point with the student with the B's and the A, and I think one thing I would say to that family and to that student, if you have not done the engagement and you apply EA, and the first time they hear from you is that application, then it's like turning in all C's in the 7th semester.
Yeah, but you dodging my question. I asked you if you think giving an incentive for ED is an ethical. Yeah. Is crossing an ethical line of impropriety, or is it a necessary business reality to survive? That if you've tried everything else and and it's not working and it's understandable and justifiable,
is it unethical? Well, it's not, because it's not against
the
national policy.
Yeah,
so
right.
I would say that it isn't. Does it force people? Like, I had a parent send it to me. And they, Denver was, definitely on the list, but it was way down. It made it pop up. But in terms of the student's reaction to the school, it didn't shift it at all. It didn't make the student go look at it more. It didn't make them.
But that's one case. I know Lisa's working with somebody who's EDing to Denver, and this is playing a role in it. And then keep in mind, so many schools were already giving a tuition discount or merit scholarship to everybody anyway.
Right.
I know that's a little different thing, but St. Olaf's out with guaranteed $20,000. Here is a quote from St. Olaf's website. I looked it up literally today, this morning, before recording this. Our early decision commitment, it says in big, bold caps. Then it says, any student who applies and is admitted through early decision will receive a minimum of $20,000 in St. Olaf scholarships. By the way, High Point is offering a lot in their ED packages for the first time for the class of 2024, including free tuition to 10 different master's programs for students who apply ED for undergraduate. So the incentives are here, and I just see them only growing as there are less college students out there, and colleges are fighting in many cases for survival, or at least to be financially healthy. We know all they were doing was high tuition revenue, high tuition discount model, make Johnny feel great that he got a $20,000 scholarship. Now they're just coming clean with it.
Right.
I know that's a little apples and oranges. So it's not, but I think you said it well. It's not ED if it's not illegal, but is it? I would say that if you really thoroughly go through counseling with someone and say, I want to make sure that this is a match, and you're not just trying to get people in there, I can understand it. And I have a feeling it's going to catch on and grow because we're a lot of copier cats out here. When stuff is working, and when you see how many more EDs Denver got this year, now that could be a problem. If it becomes the Wild Wild West and everybody's doing it, then it won't be healthy for the frenzy of where am I ED? I got ED and I'm thinking about it in the 9th grade. Like, that's not a healthy thing. It is already not healthy. The mindset of I have to apply ED that is so prevalent in affluent suburbs and independent schools, particularly from Washington, D.C. to Boston, or really Northern Virginia to New England, I should say.
Well, I just have so many questions. Like, do you give that $5,000 for the whole 4 years?
They are. They're doing it for all 4 years.
What happened to those people on campus? Do they get worse packages? Do you in 5 years cut 18 programs because you were spending your 5 to get people to apply ED?
Well, keep in mind, here's the thing: if Anita Ware School does that, they're doing it because, hey, they may say they're getting more tuition revenue potentially out of a family than it could be a financial survival strategy, not a. Anyway, right. I think that I'm still thinking through this. I'm thinking out loud with you. I don't like the idea of it. It's a little bit easier for me to accept now because it hasn't become the Wild Wild West. If it becomes the new norm, I would be fearful of the frenzy, the college frenzy that it creates. We already have people that you and I work with that are like, I got to apply ED somewhere, and they're feeling stressed about it. Yeah. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I guess I just come down to something, though. Like, at the end of the day, colleges are businesses, and they have to survive in order to serve. And if you can't survive, or you're not surviving in a healthy way because your revenue is down so significantly that you're cutting,
right,
then I think certain things are understandable that the public castigates. That's just how I look at it. Like, if this is going to make you be more financially solvent or healthy, it's kind of your job is to help your institution to be the healthiest that it can be. So anyway, I know I stirred up the pot here. I know we went off topic, but I think people don't mind us talking about it. And I love that we have 7 hosts and everyone has their own opinion, and we don't always agree. And you and I, not that you and I didn't agree on this, because I think we did agree.
Yep.
I appreciate you, my friend, and I liked how you come at things from so many angles. And so I wish I had another hour to talk to you.
Well, I wish I had another hour too. And we'll have to see how this, works itself out. But we are in a new time. So I think we will see some interesting offers come out, because not everyone is going to survive. Like, there's a lot of colleges, we've talked about this before. I don't know if they're going to survive.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when people hear that, they think, well, get better at your marketing. I don't think they realize sometimes how much people are doing everything you could ever imagine they could ever do.
Yeah.
So that is so naive to just say, get better at your marketing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'll see you next month, my friend.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Lisa, let's play Julie from California. She's got a question.
Hi, Mark. This is Julie in Northern California. You guys had a good recent discussion of school profiles, which I found really interesting. My student is at a public school, and I wondered if you had any idea who at the school I might ask about the profile, and if that's something that a district creates or a school creates. The other question I had was related to your conversation about the University of Michigan supplemental essay questions. I wanted to pass those along to my student, but haven't been able to find the conversation again on the website. I was wondering if you could tell me what episode or direct me to where I might find it on the website. Thanks so much for all you guys do. Really appreciate all your hard work.
Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that is a great question about the school profile because it seems kind of mysterious. And at times I've had the school profiles of schools that my kids have gone to be very, very available, and other times they're not available at all. So I think it's interesting. I mean, I think generally the school makes it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each individual school makes it.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about this question is there can be different leadership styles that can play a role on this kind of thing. So is it possible that there's a district where a superintendent wants to see all those? It's possible, but that's not normally. Normally, it is done on the school level. And in a public school situation, the principal certainly would ultimately have a role in approving it. But depending on their leadership style, they could just delegate it to somebody in the counseling office. And it could be, like every school is different. It could be a lead counselor. Or just sometimes schools have like a college counselor person that's a little bit different than the guidance counselor. And that tends to be more prevalent with more affluent schools where they have like one counselor that's got a little more college experience. And so, in certain schools, the principal may just trust that person and just say to do it. But in most instances, it's going to be a combination between the principal of the school and whoever is like the head of counseling. Those two are going to be the main people that are going to be involved in the process. So good question. And I appreciate appreciate all these enthusiasm for our podcast from all these listeners, but also I kind of get excited when people start talking to their own school and saying, because we've had a few people that have responded to that episode on school profiles and said like they're in conversations with their school. Because we have a lot of listeners who are advocates for kids, sometimes in not only just their own kid. They're like, look, this could help everybody. And if they say, hey, that's hurting our school, that we're not giving schools what they want, we have a lot of people that are in positions, whether they're, PTA or PTSA president. I mean, I just see the emails that come in. I mean, that's the kind of engaged listener that we tend to attract. And so I just get excited when I see people saying, hey, I'd like to play a role in, seeing what we can do to maybe improve our profile or give information to colleges that they want. So Julie also had a second question, University of Michigan tips for the college-specific question. So Julie and I did that at the start of episode 363. And I understand why you couldn't find that, because in our show notes, we have a pretty good recap of the article and the question from a listener, College Spotlight, and the interview. But that was actually given in an admissions tip section. And we don't list the admissions tip, admissions vernacular, big number. None of that stuff goes into the show notes. So if you kind of heard something, you're driving, and then you want to go back and find it, you really could waste a lot of time, and none of our search features would probably pull that up. So, but the good news is, even that doesn't have a timestamp, that's at the very start. So you can just go to the start of the episode, and after we do a little chit chat and small talk, it's the first thing up, which sometimes isn't that short with me. I'm a chatterbox. But at least we don't have to jump into the middle episode and tell you to search, because we just don't have timestamps listed for that, but it's always at the start. So it should be a pretty easy find. And for people who are wondering what that was, we looked at one of the University of Michigan's custom questions, and Julie and I had a conversation about how we approach this and how we recommend you approach it and what's a good way to answer it. And so once again, this is another one we've had multiple responses from, especially the college counseling community, people wanting to sort of share this with some of their students. So that's all I got on this. Anything else, Lisa?
No, good luck, Julie.
Yeah, good luck, Julie. Thank you for being a listener. Julie, for sending this question. You'll get a copy of Elliot Felix's book, How to Get the Most Out of College, 127 Ways to Make Connections, Make It Work for You, and Make a Difference. But we need your address in order to send you the book. Please text me at 404-664-4340. Thanks.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, one thing I've learned after doing 100 plus interviews is some interviews, when I go back and edit them, I just like them a lot more than I recalled when I actually did the interview. And this interview with Lee Coffin is one of them. And one of the reasons why I think this interview is so powerful is because of Lee's transparency. My favorite people to interview are people who don't just keep everything close to the vest. They're really ready to be transparent. And over the next 3 weeks, Lee breaks new information that a lot of people in the whole world of college admissions won't know until you hear what he has to say, especially in part 2 of 3. But the whole interview is really rich. So in part 1, Lee gives his elevator pitch to explain how Dartmouth is different from other Ivies, as well as their overlap schools. I've said Christina Lopez from Barnard did the best job of anyone at giving an overview of their school. But boy, Lee's a close second. Lee talks about one personal quality he really looks for when he's reading an admissions file. Lee talks about why PQs fly under the radar of things that are important to an admission officer. And he uses my favorite analogy. He compares the admission process to an employer hiring someone that they need in their company. Listen and enjoy. You ready to talk Dartmouth College?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's talk about Dartmouth College. Yeah.
So I heard you on a father-son podcast, which I thought was very
Hold
good.
Me Back. Yeah.
Hold Me Back. Yeah, you did a masterful job of explaining how Dartmouth was unique compared to other Ivies and just other schools. And I'd love you to sort of give the elevator pitch here. How is Dartmouth different from other Ivies or your overlaps? And, I'll let you take it where you want to go with it.
So I always advise students when I'm doing a junior program to think about the 3 Ps, program, place, and people. And so I'm going to answer your question around my 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps that represent Dartmouth, when I laugh when I hear people say, I've applied to all 8 Ivies. And I think, you're silly. Because the 8 of us are very different places that have a shared affiliation, but you put Penn and Dartmouth next to each other, and they're really different undergraduate experiences. So owning this experience, and I mentioned the yield. One of the things that's happening here is I think we're being really clear about this is who we are, where we are, what we do. So the place in our example is where I'll start. So we are a small liberal arts and engineering institution located in the North Woods of New Hampshire, 2 hours from Boston. And Hanover is a self-contained community framed by nature. And I start there because if you're considering Dartmouth College as your undergraduate home, that setting has to speak to you. It can't be the best place you got into. It must be a place that you can imagine coming to this rural campus that for some parts of the year feels like Norway. It snows, it's cold, the world keeps moving in a winter carnival-like way because these northern places do winter like the southern places do endless summer. And so place is really important. And then in our case, how does place inform program? So, in the liberal arts and engineering, which, our peer schools would all say the same thing. How have we taken those disciplines, concentrations, institutes, and made something distinctively Dartmouth around it? One of the ways is to look at our natural setting and say, Big Green, Dartmouth is Big Green as a nickname. We are Big Green in the environmental framework. This is a campus with a really robust and deep curriculum around sustainability, about environmental policy. We have an Arctic Institute. We have an organic farm. We're right on a river. We've got mountains, and we do geology research. And for students thinking about environmentalism broadly defined, this is the perfect intellectual playground, because, you know, our faculty across all the disciplines are touching environmentalism in some way. And similarly, you think about New Hampshire as a piece of the American political puzzle. And as we come up on the next presidential election, this college has a ringside seat to the presidential election every 4 years. And the candidates are here, people interested in politics and public policy, social justice, polling, economics, international relations. Here we are. And, you know, when I lived in Massachusetts, you know, the presidential campaigns happened kind of around us, but not amidst us. And I came to New Hampshire and I said, oh, look, they're all here. And so I share that because I think both of these examples, I'm using environmentalism and politics, it's tactile. You know, Dartmouth has a scale where, you know, most of our classes, about 2/3 of the courses we offer, have 12 students or fewer. We have a quarter system, not a semester system. So students take 3 courses for 10 weeks in the fall, winter, spring, and perhaps the summer term, and design the sophomore, junior sequence in whatever pattern makes sense to what they're studying, and when it makes sense to be in Hanover, when it makes sense to be in Argentina, when it makes sense to go work at McDonald's for that off term. And also the opportunity to take a major and modify it, to say, you know, I'm pre-med, I'm interested in biology, I'm interested in gender and women's studies, and I'm interested in Spanish. So I'm going to do the biology major modified by gender and women's studies and Spanish. And so that major isn't a double major, it's not a major minor, it's a modified major that incorporates a student's curiosity across really different parts of the curriculum. And I would say for Dartmouth, a student has the agency to map her own path through this curriculum. It is not a place where someone hands a playbook to the entering class in September and says A follows A, then B, then C, then D, then shift. It's maybe you do J first and then come back to B and then slide over to E and then come back to A, and design your program around your academic interests as they emerge and your curiosity. And the community we have built here is framed by high achievers who have a degree of independence, who can think on their own about what makes sense for them in the curriculum. I think a Dartmouth student needs to be courageous and creative to kind of do this on the fly in a 10-week term. And, you know, and I'm blessed to work at a place that's need blind for everyone, that meets full need for everyone, that has no loans for everyone, that fully covers off-campus study for everyone, and has no parent contribution for the lowest income families. So like that suite of financial aid I mentioned in my intro, I was a financial aid student. That piece to me is the twin to the admission process. Like one informs the other, and in many cases, you can't do one without the other. So that's the Dartmouth story, and I think the idiosyncrasy of this little campus is what makes it magical. And I think Julia said earlier, you either love it or you don't. I don't think people dislike it. I think people can look at it and say, this is not my jam.
Yes.
But when it is, when you see yourself represented in this place and in the way the curriculum unfolds, it's a really natural fit.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Linda with this week's recommended resource, an admissions testing overview for juniors, specifically for juniors in the 23-24 school year. In this roughly 11-minute video, Ben Neely of Revolution Prep gives an overview of the current state of standardized testing and provides a timeline for the new digital SAT suite of tests. The PSAT is now digital, and the SAT goes digital in March of 24. Speaking of the PSAT, he also covers the importance of that test in preparing for the official SAT and the role the PSAT plays in the National Merit Scholarship Program. Colleges don't prefer the ACT or the SAT in admissions, but there are differences between the two that students should be aware of. This video provides a side-by-side comparison of the two, including duration. The digital SAT is shorter, content covered, length of the reading passages, how much math is included, and what the most challenging aspect is for each test. Ben also gives details on the type of math and what the reading and writing questions are like on the digital SAT. He closes with how students can develop a standardized testing plan. Components of this plan, which should be a long-term process, include which tests to focus on, the ACT or SAT, how to take practice tests, when to take an official test, test retakes because most students don't get their best score the first time, and how to prepare. And there are free resources available. You can find the link to this timely and helpful video in our show notes of this episode.
I love that answer again, by the way, but I want to have you talk just a little bit more about one piece of this, which I've personally seen, and I think it was really accentuated well in a book that our listeners are going to wonder if I get a kickback because I mentioned this
I'm
book.
Playing with my hair here.
Well, no, we're not videotaping.
I know, it's funny. Your camera's going the wrong way, and so I'm using the wrong hand to. There we go.
Okay.
Just gonna leave it.
There you go. So, somebody who worked for you, Becky Sabke.
Yeah.
I love her book, Valedictorians at the Gate. And I thought she did a great job of discussing what makes Dartmouth unique. And it was a lot of that piece you were talking about. There was a combination of how the quarter system with the network of alumni coupled with the career center and all the unique combinations you've talked about with majoring in that to put people in really unique opportunities, learning by doing. And I've seen that. I'm gonna shout out a student of mine because I know his mom's listening, Satchel Williams. The first year, he's getting a White House opportunity. I'm like, whoa, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And it was all through that combination of how you use quarter systems and your alumni and your unique curriculum. Anything else you want to share about that? I think you did a good job of discussing it already, but I just think it deserves some accentuation.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been struck by as an admission officer here is the way it all does connect. And I've worked at 4 places so far, and this one has the most indelible continuity from the first year class to the people who are coming back for their 70th reunion. There is a very strong alumni community. I mean, reunions was last week, place was jammed. And you see, in our mission statement, it says, educating people for a lifetime of responsible leadership. And you look around, all different spaces, and you see Dartmouth alums doing good work. I mean, I always think about the U.S. Senate. There's 6 or maybe now 7 Dartmouth alums in the Senate, and they're from, there's a couple Democrats, a couple Republicans, Angus King from Maine, and it's like this nice rainbow of people from different walks of life. I think one of the things Becky and I share as kind of a way of thinking about Dartmouth is I put a high premium on kindness as a quality that in any person is really lovely. And as you're building a self-contained community in the woods, essential to when you think about the diversity of the student body at Dartmouth, whether it's geographic or by their identities or their points of view. People get along here, and you have to work at that. And I think it gives us an opportunity to model civil society to our student body, to say you don't have to agree with everybody, you shouldn't yell at them, and you should practice kindness when you can. And I think weaving that into the fabric of a community. When we did our admitted student events in April, I had so many parents come up to me and reference a comment I made in the admitted student message about kindness. And they said, you described my child. I said, well, that's why we admitted her. We're looking to build a community of peers that shares academic oomph, but also has the ability to frame community and make the community hum with an energy that sustains it.
I think people really don't understand how important those personal qualities are in not only to making a community special, but how valuable they are in the selection process. There's so much talk about test scores and AP this and, what I do on the summers and this extracurricular. And I'm not saying all those things don't get evaluated, but so many times, someone's in class 15 hours out of 168 hours in a week. And you guys are looking at, what's going to make this community special in the dorms, in the dining rooms, and in the intramural playing fields. And a lot of times it is those personal qualities.
And I say to parents, as they think about this, if you are in a position to hire anyone where you work, you do an interview. And, the resume helps decide who comes for the interview. But the conversation in the interview often points to who you choose to join you. And you're looking for these same qualities that make a workplace work. And, we are, and the problem with the personal pieces of an application is they're hard to measure. And I used to work, when I was at Tufts, I worked for Robert Sternberg, who's a psychologist who'd been at Yale and does a lot of intelligence assessment. And, he taught me something that has stayed with me all these years later. Bob would say, if most colleges would say they value creativity, but there's no way at the end of the admission process to say, here's the creativity score of the class we just accepted. And so the GPA and the SAT hog the spotlight, because I can tell you I value curiosity, collaboration, kindness, creativity, citizenship, sarcasm. I can keep going, but all these things make for an interesting person. But I cannot, for my board of trustees, I can't do it for the media, I can't even do it for the class when they arrive in September, say, your curiosity index is a 9.2. But I can tell them we valued evidence of curiosity in the way you introduce yourself as an applicant. We absolutely responded to recommendations and interviews and peer introductions that gave evidence of you as a decent, kind, inclusive person. And that might have had nothing to do with your extracurricular profile. These things, when people ask me what counts, I say everything counts. It's the degree to which it counts depends on how you've used the application to tell your story and how that institution meeting you through that platform, do we value the same things you do? Are we trying to, the smaller the place, I think the more intentional you must be. I know Julia was at Haverford, every seat in these little classes matters. You don't have the bandwidth to say, law of averages will make it work. So representing a small place, it's thoughtful. It may seem random on the outside, but it is a well-considered path through a big pile of high-quality people.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Julia and I in our interview with Lee Coffin. We hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3. Friends, on Monday's episode, I know you guys enjoy trends, and I want to talk to you about a new trend I'm starting to see when it comes to test optional admissions. And we'll be discussing it on Monday. We'll also continue with Lisa's excellent interview with Andrea Brenner, Dr. Andrea Brenner, helping parents help students to successfully transition to college from high school. And friends, I close you out with a quote from Azure Brown, who's a former senior admissions officer at the University of California. And this is what Azure says about the personal statement. More than anything, I want to encourage students to write from the heart. Use the words that come naturally to you. Avoid the thesaurus. Some of the worst college essays I've read were actually written quite well in terms of grammar, sentence structure, and organization, but the student's unique voice had been lost through editing, feedback from a well-intentioned adult. There is no voice more charming to an admissions reviewer than the natural writing voice of a high school senior. Boy, I like that so much, I want to read it again. This comes from Azure Brown, a former senior admission evaluator for the University of California. More than anything, I want to encourage students to write from the heart. Use the words that come naturally to you. Avoid the thesaurus. Some of the worst college essays I've read were actually written quite well in terms of grammar, sentence structure, and organization, but the student's unique voice had been lost through editing feedback from a well-intentioned adult. There is no voice more charming to an admissions officer than the natural writing voice of a high school senior. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.